Welcome to the Pick Me Up Podcast Unscripted, brought to you by CDI College, the training you need for the career you want. I'm Jennifer Lee, and join me for a monthly conversation where we unravel the myths of mental health with our expert guests. Get ready for a fun and informative deep dive into many topics that are currently on our minds. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 4 of the CDI College's Pick Me Up podcast. I'm Jennifer Lee, and I'm currently broadcasting from North Vancouver, BC. And I'd like to recognize and honor that we're gathered here today to learn, share, and work on the traditional, unceded, and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And we have members from our college community joining us today. Tiffaney is the campus director for Edmonton City Centre and is joining us with her mother, Darlene. And they are broadcasting from Edmonton, which is located within Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homelands and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. We acknowledge this land as traditional territories of many First Nations, such as the Cree, Dene, Stoney, Saulteaux, and Blackfoot. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi there. It's a pleasure for us to be there today. Here, I guess. My name is Tiffaney Bodnariuk. I'm the campus director for our CDI City Centre location here in Edmonton. We're here today with my mom. Her name is Darlene Bodnariuk. She's the executive director for Onion Lake Family Services, and I'm very proud of her for being here today.
Hi, my name is Darlene Bodnariuk, as my daughter said, and I am the executive director of Onion Lake Child and Family Services. And our community is located north of Lloydminster, 50 kilometers north of Lloydminster. And I'm happy to be here today. Thank you very much.
In this episode of the Pick Me Up podcast, just a warning to listeners that this episode contains potentially triggering subject matter and includes testimony directly from a residential school survivor. We will hear Darlene's story as a residential school survivor, and we thank her so much for coming here today and sharing her story, and Tiffaney, who is connected to our college community, who is her daughter, for being here as well. It's important for us to listen to stories like Darlene's that you're about to hear, for us to educate ourselves and learn from Canada's shameful past. Here is Darlene's story.
I was 5 years old when I first entered the residential school system. And prior to that, are fleeting memories of a happy childhood with my family. While attending the residential school, I was very lonely, fearful, scared, and felt abandoned. I witnessed some of the harsh and poor treatment of the other children and was very fearful to draw attention to myself. I would isolate myself and stay quiet for fear of being beaten with a belt or ruler by the nuns. Within the first hour of my arrival, I was immediately ushered into the recreation room, as they called it, and I was plopped onto a chair and held down while they began cutting off my hair. I was then deloused, my clothing removed, and forced to shower. I never saw my clothing again. The nuns then gave me clothing with a number on it, and from that day on, I was known by that number. After leaving the residential school, I did not realize the lasting effects of the trauma I had experienced in the residential school, and that it had such an impact on my life, such as my inability to speak in public. It was always very difficult for me to do any type of public speaking. The fear of attracting attention would come back to me and cause me to struggle when speaking, and it wasn't until recently that I found my voice and have made the connection as to why I was not able to speak in public. Because of the lack of love and nurturing in residential school, I wanted to provide my children with a loving and nurturing environment so that they would grow into individuals who would have equal opportunities, the chance to be anything that they wanted to be, and have confidence in themselves. I wanted a better life for them. The residential school is not a place for a child to grow up in. The treatment definitely is not of a loving parent. We were never provided any care or affection that a child needs when growing up. I'm very grateful my children did not have to live such a life and did not have to experience what I went through. We were not taught how to love or even parent. We were taught to clean, taught to be subservient, and we were taught to be ashamed. We were ashamed of who we were, and being an Indian meant being dirty and worthless, and many more other things I have not spoken of. And then when I was 17, I left the reserve and I moved to St. Paul. My parents separated when I was 5 years old, and I went to move in with my mom and got to know her. And eventually from there, I moved to Edmonton to take hairdressing. And so I'm a beauty school dropout. I ended up finding out that I couldn't stand doing hair. And so I eventually met my husband. And from there, we lived in Edmonton, and then we moved to Lloydminster. And that's where the children grew up in. And then later in life, when I turned 35, I decided to educate myself and take social work. So for 4 years, I lived in Saskatoon with my children. My husband stayed in Lloyd and continued to work. And we struggled and suffered through lack of money and not enough funds, and just trying to find a home and still go to school. And but I completed it. I finished it. I got my degree, and then I came back to Lloydminster and looked for work. And that's when I was hired back in Onion Lake, as they were looking for social workers. So I went to work there, decided that social work, I could not, it was like too much like residential school. So after 3 years in social work, I decided to leave it. And then I went into a different career, which was, pretty close to child and family services. But I did the income security for for welfare. So I was there for 13 years, and I was a director there as well. And then I was asked to help out with child welfare. And then there's little children there, and they can't speak for themselves. So I went back and I went and helped out. Eventually I was asked to stay, and I've been there since. So I speak for the children and for the families, and we try to reunify families and bring children and parents back together again, because the type of environment that we live in, there's so many drugs, abusive drugs, and methamphetamine and all those types of drugs. And again, it's like going through a residential school, except that the parents are now separating themselves from their children and trying to work at bringing the kids back home, and seeing the suffering and the pain on the little children is really tough. It is a tough job being in child welfare, but here I am in the thick of things. I'm back in child welfare, and hopefully make a difference in a child's life. If I bring one child home, I'm successful. Then if I bring more than that, then I'm Supergirl.
My mom didn't necessarily share a lot of her experiences till we were older, till we understood what everything meant. So my mom and I have in-depth conversations about her growing up and her stories. And I think one story that will always stick with me is when she describes what the residential school looked like. My living room has high ceilings, and they're bright white curtains. So when we were sitting in my living room the one day, she had mentioned that the residential school had long windows and long curtains, and they were white like that, so very institutional. So I didn't like that, and I didn't want that memory there for my mom. So I changed them. So I changed them to a dark gray, so she wouldn't have to relive that memory.
For me, this is the first time I'm hearing the reason why the drapes were changed in her living room. And so I didn't know that she did that. But there's probably so much more that I could talk about, so much more that I could share to help people understand individuals, not just, you can't all put us in one barrel and assume that we all share the same experience. My growing up from the residential school, I wanted to give my children a fighting chance at living a good life, a normal life, and to be part of the world, of all the cultures, and but not so separate that that they wouldn't have a fighting chance. So by not teaching them Cree, I struggled with two languages. Having learned Cree first and then going to school to learn English was very difficult for me. And I always felt I was below average while I was in school. So I didn't want them to feel inadequate or to lack self-esteem or confidence. And I wanted to give them a running jump into the direction of a good life and good education and a good knowledge of the language that they are speaking, so that they can, in the future, help themselves and strive to be the best that they can be, and to come out being number one, if you can say it like that, so that they would have good things in life. They wouldn't live in poverty, that they would also earn an honest and healthy, good life for themselves, that they wouldn't be standing in line for handouts, that they would always take care of themselves, and keeping in mind that family comes first and always.
It's nice. It's nice to hear. They may not always be good stories, and they may not always be good experiences, but I feel that the stories and the information that my mom shares with me when it comes to either past traditions or past experiences with residential school, it's nice for me, because like my mom had mentioned earlier, she wanted us to grow up in a different environment. So we grew up in a very loving home, and I have amazing parents. But I didn't learn Cree, so that's not something I know. I didn't learn a lot about all of our traditions and traditional ways for Aboriginal people. So I grew up in a predominantly white community, and it has, like I said, I've had a wonderful childhood, but I do feel like because of what happened in the past and what happened to my mom and past generations, I feel that has caused a break in learning just about our heritage. Growing up for myself in the high school system in Lloydminster, Alberta, there was a Native Studies class. However, it wasn't, you don't learn about everything that actually happened. So growing up in Canada, you don't hear all of the Canadian history. So I think that's a part where our system is kind of broken, that we need to know, the children growing up need to be aware of everything that has happened, not only with European settlers or anything like that. They also need to include the Indigenous people that were here in Canada first. So it's that whole part of the education system is completely almost wiped out. So it wasn't actually until I was in high school that I even had an elective to take a Native Studies course. So it wasn't something that was willingly given to us. It's something that we had to, if we wanted to know about it, we had to ask family. So it wasn't something that we learned in school. So I think that's a little unfair and a little unjust for people growing up within Canada to know the actual history of all of of the whole nation. So we're missing a large chunk of that.
So as my daughter says, I do believe that is a primary subject that should be reintroduced into the educational system, so that not just our own people are learning, but people throughout the world and all nations will learn about our residential school traumas that we have experienced back in time, and that they would know the truth, and that residential schools would not be a hidden topic or shove it under the rug type of mentality, so that we can address these and begin our healing by educating people, and so that they can learn everything there is to learn about Indigenous peoples and why we are the way we are today.
I agree. If I even think back to my own schooling here in Canada, either in elementary or, of course, high school, Indigenous studies is just such a small portion what we learned, and it really does need to change. And that's why thank you, Darlene, again, for sharing your story with us. And I want to know, since more people like yourself have been sharing their experience as residential school survivors, and of course, we've had the mass discoveries of unmarked graves. Have you started to see a change in the way that we talk about Canadian history?
No, I have not. I have heard empty promises from the government. We have been given a day of recognition of the truth and reconciliation for the treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada. However, it will not help the healing process for our nation. The only way things will get better for our people is to educate one another and to no longer hide the truth of residential schools. I think just by listening to our stories and believing in our stories and believing that this did happen in Canada, and that all Indigenous people, well, not all of them, most of our people had gone through the residential school system. So I think by listening would help, and also educating other people, not just within Canada, but throughout the world, so everyone knows everything that there could possibly be known about Indigenous peoples and the plight of the people. My message would be, it is okay to seek help and to be vulnerable, and find someone you can trust that will listen to you, because there needs to be an end to the shame for all the things forced upon us. And we can share our stories to educate the people in Canada and throughout the world. People need to listen to our stories. They need to hear the pain, the heartache, and all the emotions that the residential school survivors have experienced. Talking to my childhood classmates, and most of the people that were from Onion Lake were also had attended residential schools. And for us, talking about the residential school was just something that was normal. But we knew that the treatment and the punishments were not normal, because we didn't experience those things at home. And it was just something that we all shared. And knowing that other children had gone through this, and even our parents and grandparents, it was almost like something that's normal, but it isn't. So I did not feel that I was supported, because everyone had gone through the residential school system. If you were to visit a reservation, you can see the pain, you can see the trauma, you can see the suffering. Some of our reservations are like third world countries. And after you've seen that, then you can share your stories, educate your friends, families, and neighbors. I think education is the answer in how we do not repeat history.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate you and Tiffaney coming on here today to share with us, a painful past, but like you said, we need to be able to listen to be able to move forward. So again, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks you for having us.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Pick Me Up Podcast Unscripted. Brought to you by CDI College, the training you need for the career you want. Make sure to continue the conversation by following us on our social media pages. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any episodes, And for more information about CDI College, check out our website, cdicollege.ca. Talk to you next time.